All right, welcome in. It is Tuesday, which means it's time for Dungeons and Deliberations. I'm the Master Dungeon, DM Mitch Smithson, here on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ The Master of Dungeons, where we talk about all things D&D and play play a live play game, and of course, we do stream a D&D adjacent game on Thursdays and Fridays for our Dungeon Delving series. But tonight is Dungeons and Deliberations, where it's basically ask the Dungeon Master if you have questions about being a DM or anything about Dungeons and Dragons. You can ask us about that. But tonight we always have an extra topic on hand for until, of course, we get a few more followers. We've only been at it for, I think, last week. We completed our 8th week, and we do definitely welcome and love all of the support that we've gotten so far. We've did surpass 100 followers last week, which is really great. We've got our Patreons. We've got 3 up. We're up to 3, which is awesome. And of course, we do have some things coming up to add to that. Again, also, if you're interested in following all of our different platforms on social media, you can click the About Us section below. It should have a link there to all of our socials. And of course, if you want to join our community Discord channel or Discord server, Master of Dungeons community server, you can click on the Discord panel below as well, and that will give you an invitation to that as also. So the additional topic tonight is just basically going to be talking about creating adventures for your D&D games, for your homebrew campaigns, such like that. Obviously, there's tons of different adventures that you can find on the DM's Guild. You can also buy the hardcover adventures that are put out by Wizards of the Coast. Things like Curse of Strahd, Storm King's Thunder, the brand new anthology, Keys from the Golden Vault. And of course, if you want to make up your own adventures, this is kind of a guide, at least to how I put adventures together. I am one of the story co-leads for the Dreams of the Red Wizards campaign for the D&D Adventures League, which is the organized play for Dungeons and Dragons. Makes the characters portable. You can find all the information about that on our Discord server. Of course, you can look up Adventures League and go to the Wizards of the Coast website. They have a whole couple of pages about that and all of the PDFs and downloads that you need to get started. So what we're going to talk about tonight is just the basic ideas of creating an adventure. Again, if you go to dmsguild.com, you can find a bunch of different layouts for writing adventures if you want to publish. You can look into that if you want to publish your adventures on the Dungeon Masters Guild. There's a bunch of guidelines about doing that. If you want to publish your own Adventurers League adventures, there's what's called Dungeon Craft, which is the community can create their own Adventurers League adventures as well. But this is just more of a basic idea and outline of how you can go through, even if you don't want to publish or anything like that, just to help you structure an adventure for your home game, or perhaps maybe for some players that you play with at a local store, things like that. So first, of course, what I always do is I look at the things that I have here on the screen. I went ahead and opened Roll20 so we can work a little bit in the handout here. Of course, you can create your handouts in Roll20 by going to your journal up here in the top right corner, which looks like a little newspaper. You can click on Add and then just add a handout. We already have one started. It's called Adventure, and we're going to use that to kind of put together a short little adventure that you could use yourself if you want to use it for your friends for your homebrew game. Hopefully we'll get done and through all these different steps tonight. If not, perhaps we will go ahead and pick up on the rest of it next week for the stream for Dungeons and Deliberations. But generally what I like to do is go through and first get an adventure background. What's happened before the adventure to get the adventure going to where you're getting ready to get the characters, the quest or their mission for what the adventure is all about. So in the background of the adventure, you want to have something along the lines like, say, we're doing a village named Westfall, let's say, and there used to be a wizard near Westfall. So I just went ahead and opened the edit the adventure, and then I just put everything in the GM's notes. If I'm running it online, Obviously, if I'm not, I'm just typing it into a Word document. We're going to say the adventure takes place in and around the village of Westfall. Let's say a century ago. Sorry, I'm not that great of a typist. The wizard. Let's name our wizard Lore. A powerful evoker. Lived in a tower on the outskirts of the village. He was very protective of the village and its inhabitants, but as a former adventurer, Lore had many enemies. So that just gives us a basic idea of starting out the adventure. We're going to have it set in and around the village of Westfall. We've established that a century ago, the wizard Lore, a powerful evoker, lived in a tower on the outskirts of the village. He was very protective of the village and its inhabitants, but as a former adventurer, Lore had many enemies. It is believed that on a trek to the outer plains, we'll say, or some other adventure, Lore met an unknown fate and has not been seen since then. So that's kind of the background. That we're going to have this. We have this wizard that lived in a tower that kind of protected the village, but of course he had many enemies, and believed that perhaps maybe he's on a trek to the outer plains or some other adventure. That he Lore met an unknown fate, which has not been seen since then. So that gives it a little bit of a background idea. Now, what we want to also do with the background is we want to go through and figure out what is, kind of just a little tease of what's going to happen for the adventure next. And again, these are just notes. If you want to flesh them out more for yourself, feel free to do so. Generally what I'll do is I'll write our adventure blurbs, just these little different things to fill in, starting with a background, and then we'll have what we call an adventure overview, which basically gives us an idea that we sit down and, okay, we have the background of the adventure. Now what's going to take place in the adventure? I always like to have 3 different acts, kind of like a play or like a script or something like that, where you go through and you have, well, of course, we'll walk through that here in a second, but the adventure overview will take in those 3 parts basically, and just basically have like a general paragraph or so, not even necessarily a paragraph, maybe just a couple sentences about what's going to happen in each act. And then go to adventure hooks, like how are the characters all going to meet in the village of Westfall? If your characters, say you're running your own homebrew campaign in your own campaign world, or even an established game world, and you want to find a way to bring in characters, like say one character's playing the adventure and he's from a different area of the world, or another character, she's from a southern part of the campaign world, and then another person is playing and they are from a different area as well. It's a way to use the adventure hooks to find a way to get each one of the characters together. Of course, one of those other ideas for adventure hooks could be that they're all childhood friends, something like that, but just find out different ways to create small, like maybe 2 or 3, perhaps 4 different hooks of ways to get the characters together, and that will give you an idea. Once you know what players are playing, what characters they're playing as well, it gives you a few different options to get them all together. And then after that, you'll want to create a way to get the characters, the quest or mission. So you've gotten the characters with the adventure hook into the area where the adventure takes place. And then now you have to do, in the Adventures League, we call it what's called a call to action, to where the characters are presented. After they all get together, they're presented with the quest giver or mission giver, the person that's going to give out and give the information about starting the quest. You can do that in a lot of different ways as well. You can have a specific NPC that gives out this information. You can also, in your adventure hook, say, hey, this has been rumored to be going on. And then just the players can make it to the village of Westfall and then ask about. So you can create a few NPCs here and there of some different villagers, commoners, things like that. Perhaps maybe a local noble that's kind of taken over the protection of the village since the disappearance of the wizard. So you go through, and then that's how they get the quest. And then, of course, you have part 1 of the adventure, which is Act 1, part 2, Act 2, part 3, Act 3. And then, of course, in each one of those acts, you have your different areas of the adventure for that particular part. And, of course, at the end, you'll have like a development, perhaps if you want to turn it into something more than just a one-shot adventure. If you want to go through and maybe turn it into a campaign and, again, create another adventure after in the same style after you're finished with the current one. Then, of course, if you're going to do it as just a one-shot adventure, you kind of have a wrap-up instead of like a development. Of course, you can use the developments to, at the end of each act or part, to help the characters with what's going on, what's going to happen to get them into the part 2, then what's going to happen to get them into part 3. So going through, we do an adventure background that helps you go through and get an idea of what you want, what's happened in the past, and what's starting to happen now to get the players into the adventure. So that's the part that we're going to continue to work on here. And we're not going to go through and do a complete write-up, a full adventure or anything of that nature, like different. They're going to go to a crypt, and then we're not going to go through and make every single room with a crypt. If you want to do that for yourself, that's really great. If you want to kind of fly by the seat of your pants a little bit, maybe just do a little bit of improvising, you can just use some notes like these. What I like to do, especially when I'm writing an adventure for publication, I'll get these blurbs filled out first, and then I'll go through. What I like to do when I'm doing certain parts of the adventure is I like to go through. I love creating maps. So what I'll go through is I'll create a fun map. So I'm going to be like, okay, this first part of the adventure is going to take place in the forest. So I'll go through and create myself a forest map and put little different trails, things through that map, different areas. And then looking at that map, it helps me kind of get my creative writing flowing a little bit, and then go through and start designing the different encounters from the map itself. Everyone has a different way of doing it. Again, these are just some of the different things that I look at and the utilities that I use for creating the different adventures that I've written so far. Now, keep in mind also, there are plenty of different websites on the internet that you can go to that will give you random generators for adventures. So that you can use those as writing prompts. If you're just sitting there, you can't come up with any specific ideas, you can just click on random adventure creator, and we'll go through and give you lots of different prompts for that. I'm not going to list anything specifically. You can easily Google, Bing, Yahoo, search engine, whatever search engine you use, and search a random fantasy adventure generator, and lots of those different ones will pop up. You can obviously, since you're doing a homebrew or whatever, you can go through and adjust it to your own campaign world or whatever campaign world you happen to be running the adventure in. But that can give you a lot of different prompts to create an adventure background. So what we're going to say is it takes place in and around the village of Westfall. A century ago, the wizard lore, a powerful evoker, lived in a tower on the outskirts of the village. He was very protective of the village and its inhabitants, but it's a former adventurer. He had many enemies, and he hasn't been since he last left. Then we can say recently, However, farmers and traveling merchants, there's only one L there, have seen the flickering of torchlight in the upper levels of the tower. No one is sure if Lore has returned or if bandits or thieves have decided to make themselves wealthy by looting Lore's tower. We'll say the constable, it's got a little village, not necessarily a mayor of a village. And of course you can make up an NPC's name. Let's say Marcus Lowfield. So, to constable of the village, Marcus Lowfield is looking for adventurers to investigate the strange happenings at the tower. So that gives us a little idea and a bit of background for what's going on in the adventure. So what we can go through and do is, if you want to put the adventure overview, you can do a different a thing like I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting just to help me with the way it looks. We'll head to adventure background, adventure overview. I'm going to say adventure takes place over 3 parts, ending with a wrap-up. So we'll look at it as kind of a one-shot adventure. Obviously, if you wanted to have it end with a development, that's cool as well. So what we want to do is basically we want to list part 1, part 2, and part 3. So basically what these different parts do is that's going to help you go through and get an idea of what you want to happen in the adventure itself. We also are going to have we'll just go ahead and switch this over here, this getting the characters the quest or mission, just to the call to action, just so that we can flesh that out a little bit. So we're going to say takes place over 3 parts, say 4 parts, because we'll have the call to action. All right, so we'll put the call to action here first. What we're going to have in the call to action, let's say the adventurers arrive in the village of Westfall and make their way to the constable's office. Where the constable relates the information So basically what happens in the call to action is the adventurers arrive in the village of Westfall. They make their way to the constable's office, where the constable relates the information in the adventure background. So we've already gotten the adventure background. So he can tell them a little bit about the lore about Lore, the wizard. Of course, you can flesh it out even more. So you can give the wizard a lineage or race. You can give him a little bit more of a description and such like that when you're putting together the extra parts. So that allows you to create, when we go down to write the call of action or fill out, just a couple of paragraphs, if you don't want to, if you're not publishing, just to give yourself a few ideas of what you're going to do in that call to action. But this is just a brief idea that allows you kind of to think about what you want to happen in each part. And then when you get to those parts, you can flesh them out even more. So we're just going to have in the first part, the call to action, the adventurers arrive in the village. They make their way to the constable's office, and the constable relates the information in the adventure background. Of course, you can, when you get to the call to action, like I said, flesh it out more, have it more conversational in your descriptions there, the actual call to action itself section of the adventure. Then we're going to go to part one. Of course, you can put in what in the call to action, what the village is going to reward the party with if they do it. Which again, you flesh out in the actual call to action. So we're going to say part one, traveling to the tower. To reach the tower, the party must head through, we'll say, the Darkling Forest, which is inhabited by all types of fey creatures. And traverse the dangers therein. So we're going to say the second part of the adventure is the adventurers will leave the village. Of course, again, you can have them leave that day, that evening, the next morning, after they have an idea of what's going on with the call to action. You can extend that call to action out a little bit, or extend the first part of the part one, traveling to the tower, the characters going through and maybe finding the local smithy or finding the local general store or something like that, to where they can purchase a few things now that they know that they're going, what their adventure is, what the adventure kind of entails of what they're doing, where they're going, allowing them to do a little preparation, role playing, getting to know the village. Perhaps you want to set the village of Westfall as a home base for the characters. Perhaps maybe we even want this tower to be kind of established as a base of operations for the adventurers. So kind of setting the stage, if you want to continue it as a continued campaign going on further. Of course, if you just do it as one shot, that's fine as well. But just maybe we're thinking about the idea of, let's go ahead and change it for now to a development, just for fun. We're just brainstorming as we're going through, kind of making it up as we go. The only thing I had when I was thinking about this tonight was I had a wizard named Lore, and I had a village called Westfall in my head. So we're just making this up as we go. So looks like we have another viewer. Awesome, welcome in. I'm actually having a little bit of issues with my Stream Deck connecting to my OBS, so I might be able to see chat. I might not be able to see chat. I think it's an issue with my VPN. I did turn that off earlier, but I apologize if you are typing in chat and I haven't seen anything. I have been having issues with that. So part one, traveling to the tower. To reach the tower, the party must head through the Darkling Forest, which is inhabited by all types of fey creatures, and they must traverse the dangers within. So that gives us just an idea of what we want to do with the tower. Or I should say the Darkening Forest around the outside of the village. You don't want it to be something that is going to be something that's going to affect the village itself. So most likely we want these fey creatures to be fairly secretive. There might be a situation when we get to writing part one that the characters come upon some sort of monstrosity, and then perhaps maybe the fey creatures might reveal themselves to aid the party. Or perhaps there might be some more dangerous fae or more ill-willed fae that might attack the party for trespassing in the forest, and then perhaps maybe some good fae help come to their aid. One of the things you want to do also when you're creating those encounters and creating those adventures is that you don't want to put things in place that make the characters seem weak. You always want to give the characters a fairly good chance to take care of the encounter, especially if it's a combat encounter or a role play encounter, even in explorations. But you do want to kind of put things there as like safety nets to kind of help them. At least I like to help them through the story, because nobody really wants to start a story and then their character is just in the middle of the story, can't get any more information and not find out what the end of the story is. So I always like to put some sort of safety net in there for the characters. Like you don't want to put the characters into a situation where they're overwhelmed by whatever encounters there are in the forest, and then have someone come and rescue them, because that kind of takes away the player agency, the character agency a little bit. Perhaps maybe when they get to a higher level, you might put something in there where they do have to be saved as part of the story element, because what they face might be too strong for them right now, but that gives them a taste of what they're going up against in the future, so that they know, they have an idea of what's happening further along in your storyline, that they're going to meet this person again. And between now and then, they do have to become, stronger and more skilled and more experienced. But for now, we'll get to that part probably most likely next week, as we're already a half hour into the stream. We're just through part one so far. So to reach the tower, the players must head through the Darkling Forest, inhabited by all types of fae. They must traverse the dangers within. Part two, the tower. To reach the tower, not to reach the tower. So for this idea, we're just going to say part two, they make it to the tower. Arriving at the tower is what we'll call that section. So the party arrives at the tower and makes it to the tower, must discover how to enter. After figuring out the puzzle of entry, the adventurers must deal with the guardian on the tower's interior. So just taking that for an idea, what we're going to do most likely for part two is we'll have the party, just the idea coming to my mind is the party will arrive at the tower, and then of course when they get there, there's no door. So what they're going to have to discover is go around, do a little bit of exploration. I always talk about the 3 tiers. We use that a lot in the Adventurers League Adventures as we're writing those. They do a lot of them. They don't really talk about it as much in the actual hardcovers from Wizards of the Coast. But we always talk about the 3 tiers, which is combat, exploration, and social. Social being role playing, where the encounter is solved via role playing with the NPCs or the monsters and such like that. Exploration is this type of situation, which is exploring around the tower itself, using stealth, using investigation, things like that to try to solve the encounter. And then what we'll do is we'll have, when we get to working on part 2, is that we'll have the tower. The tower does not have a visible interest. And the characters need to go around trying to find different ways to find out how to get in. Obviously, when we get to that part, we could have something like, maybe the party has a wizard or a bard or a magic using character that has detect magic, which could lead to another clue. And then eventually having some sort of puzzle to have the characters solve to actually get into the tower itself. And then once they get into the tower, we're going to have some sort of guardian on the interior of the tower that the characters will have to deal with, whether that be combat from the pillars or the social from the pillars. We'll figure that out when we get there. And of course, it's always good. What I like to do is always leave multiple options for all of those for almost every encounter. Like, for example, with the Dreams of the Red Wizards adventures that Cassandra McDonald and I are working up with the authors for this season of Dreams of the Red Wizards, Obscure Devotions, we're doing a lot more social and exploration. We're going to leave it to the DM with options where if you come up, because Dreams of the Red Wizards, the initial group of adventures came out when there was what was called Historic and Masters and Seasonal Adventurers League, where Seasonal Adventurers League, you played the current season or hardcover that was out. Historic, you could play older adventures if you played the historic campaign, and then of course the Master Adventures were extremely the Dreams of the Red Wizards, basically, which were definitely for more veteran and seasoned players. Did mostly relied on a lot more heavier combat and harder combat to do what's called stripping the characters' resources. We basically drain the characters of resources as they went through the adventure to make it very tough, to where they would have to action economy became a very, very big thing, and they would get down to the final battle or encounter, and if they weren't smart about saving their resources and such, they would have a more difficult time of dealing with the combat, usually a combat encounter at the end of the adventure. What we've done, and that was again when they had the different setups of the different campaigns, the seasonal campaign, a historic campaign, and master's campaign. Those are all gone now, of course. All of the campaigns are now just basically world specific. You have your Eberron campaign, you have your Ravenloft campaign now, which they recently introduced. You have a Forgotten Realms campaign, which is the standard campaign for Adventurers League, and then of course you have your Dragonlance. So what we decided to do when Cassandra and I started working with this, our idea was to kind of make the Dreams of the Red Wizard adventures more inclusive. So that because the Dreams of the Red Wizards always seem to go into Tier 4, there's a lot of players that are very apprehensive about going into Tier 4 just because of the fact that they're not really optimized type of players. They don't really optimize their characters. They do a lot of more role-playing and story-oriented characters for Adventurers League. So we're trying to make those a little bit more inclusive for higher-level play. So a lot of our stuff doesn't have a whole bunch of combat in them. There is combat in them, of course, but we always leave the option, as I mentioned earlier, talking about the section, about using all 3 pillars, giving an option for the players. You don't want to force the players to have to resolve. I mean, sometimes conflict is inevitable, especially when you're playing a game, most of the time, which is good versus evil, which is the kind of the basis of D&D. And of course, what D&D was, kind of inspired by, Lord of the Rings. It's always the struggle of good versus evil. So sometimes you could, make combat, inevitable in certain situations. But I like to try to give the players an option so that they don't have to resolve everything with combat if they choose to do it that way. So when you're doing each part of your adventure, maybe keep that in mind for your players. You know your players better, of course, than especially your home group, better than anyone else does as the DM. So of course, keep those types of ideas in mind when you're designing the different parts. Sometimes it's also good, especially when you know your players fairly well, to throw in a few different things to maybe obviously, if they don't feel comfortable doing something, you don't want to push them to do something, but I always kind of throw things in a little bit to bring them out of their comfort zone a little bit, just to help them maybe perhaps grow as a player, and of course help their character grow with their character's story as the character gains levels and goes through adventures. So keep that in mind. We'll do is when we get to part 2, we'll give perhaps maybe a social encounter option and then a combat encounter option for whatever we decide the Guardian's going to be. Sorry about that, talking a lot. All right, so then let's go with make sure to put development in there as well. So we've got our call to action. Part 1, traveling to the tower. Part 2, arriving at the tower. And then part 3, oh, sounds like my familiar. My cat has awakened. So we're going to have part 3, the tower interior. The party explores the tower's interior. Long forgotten traps and summoned creatures that Lore left behind to protect his tower. So we're going to say that when the party finally makes it past the Guardian of the tower, once they get inside the first room, that we're going to go ahead and switch over to part 3, which is the tower interior. So the party is going to explore the tower's interior, and we'll have to bypass long forgotten traps and summon creatures that Lore left behind to protect his tower. So we can go through, when we get to designing part 3, we can go through and we can add, perhaps there's an alarm in a certain area that will cause a chain reaction of summoning some sort of creatures, perhaps maybe mephits, since we're kind of looking at this as maybe a tier 1, a level 1 adventure, let's say, for just starting off, either running your first game or designing your first adventure, or starting off a campaign perhaps for your players. So the party is going to explore the tower's interior, having to bypass long forgotten traps and summon creatures Lore left behind to protect his tower. They will eventually discover the source of the light in the upper levels. What that source? We're not sure yet. Perhaps it's a spark of something that Lore left behind, that he wanted to leave behind for someone to protect the village. So maybe it's like some sort of passing on, since we mentioned earlier maybe having the tower be a base of operations for the characters, for the adventuring party. So perhaps maybe, again, just brainstorming here, perhaps maybe what we're going to do is say that all of this, the whole traveling through the woods, getting to the tower, finding a way to get in, dealing with the guardian, exploring the tower's interior, bypassing all the different spells and glyphs and traps and different types of things that Lore left behind to protect the tower, is eventually going to be something that's kind of just a rite of passage. Those that can make it through there, or Lore will say eventually decides that whoever makes it through all of that, those trials, is worthy of his tower and protecting the village, because we'll say that's all he wanted. And perhaps maybe to press on into development later on, that and of course we don't have to put the development here in this section, we can always put that later on, but what we can do is we can have again, just coming to my mind, that the characters have been chosen, and perhaps maybe this actually didn't, the spark or whatever, this light flickering in this upper room of the tower, didn't actually happen until Lore actually died. And so for this last century, Lore's been gone, and then this spark or whatever, the upper part of the tower has finally gone off, and obviously knowing that the village would be concerned about it, he sent off, they of course called for adventurers, and finding the adventurers that were able to do this. And perhaps maybe we can even put in there some sort of honor question, or some sort of moral quandary to test the characters and their mettle about if they're lawful good or good, if they're good aligned, not necessarily lawful good, but just good aligned creatures or neutral creatures or evil creatures, or evil characters or whatever. And of course, as a DM, if you want to allow players to play with evil characters, that's totally your game, your style, however you like to run games. I always like to prefer, if I'm running characters that are evil, I prefer all the characters to be evil and run basically an evil-based campaign. You can run, I found a way to run different games of where you have characters that are good aligned, neutral aligned, and evil aligned, but finding ways to make sure that they're all their goals are the same, or at least their quest is the same. Their goals for completing that quest might not be the same, but at least they're all on the same path together. Particularly a good way to do that is to run like a Thieves Guild campaign. I've run a couple of those in the 40 years I've been DMing, and those can be a lot of fun, where you have a lot of interaction with moral quandaries about this character's good, this character's neutral, this character's evil, and how that gets a little bit of inter-party tension. The important thing about running those types of games is to make sure that your players know and that they understand that any party tension that comes into play needs to be only in the game, and make sure that the characters understand that they are still friends at the end of the day. You don't want to be running a mixture of stuff, of alignments with the characters, and then the actual players getting upset because of what happens in the adventure, because there is obviously there's going to be that evil character that's going to do something that the good characters aren't going to like, etc. So I always try to make sure that the parties are at least good or neutral, especially using Adventurers League. You can't play evil characters in Adventurers League. So if you're designing something like I'm kind of, just because I do so much AL, I constantly have that in mind, especially like tonight when we're finished up here, I'm going to be working on an adventure for the Adventurers League for Dreams of Red Wizards. We'll put maybe some moral tests in that at the interior of the tower. Before we go on to adventure hooks, generally what we like to do is each section, think of timing. Generally, a session of Dungeons and Dragons is usually going to last, on average, about 3 to 4 hours. Yes, there are people that are like, what? 3 to 4 hours. We play for like 8 hours, every Saturday for 8 hours. And if you do that, that's great. You can always, of course, create another adventure or extend these separate sections to, being a lot longer. So what I'm thinking of is the call to action itself probably being about 10-15 minutes to go with that. And then we'll have part 1, traveling to the tower. Depending on how long the call to action is maybe 45 minutes to 50 minutes. So that way the call to action and part 1 are finished up in about an hour. Then we'll have part 2, arriving at the tower. Want that to last about an hour. So that way parts 1 and part 2 would be just at 2 hours, around that time period. Of course, if you don't have time constraints, if you're just playing for fun with your friends at home, playing homebrew, and you have more time, you want to, if you want to extend everything out, again, if you don't go through and like set it for publishing, if you're just creating the adventure as I mentioned earlier, just wing it and improv, you can always extend everything out. But when I'm writing an adventure, I try to, or creating an adventure for homebrew or for organized play or whatever, I always try to at least get each section to a certain time limit. So our call to action, our part 1 is going to be about an hour total. Part 2 being about an hour. And then part 3, we could probably go to 2 hours is what we're going to look at for part 3. Maybe 2 hours and 45 minutes, an hour and 45 minutes, an hour and 50 minutes. That way we have some time for the development or wrap up at the end of the session. That way, I like to run my games 3 to 4 hours. That way it's a fairly good stopping point. And again, most adventures, especially like, for example, if you look at the Candlekeep Mysteries, if you look at the anthology, the new one, Keys from the Golden Vault, almost every single one of those adventures can be ran in a 4-hour time slot. Mostly for, if you're running a local game store, if you're running at a convention, you're running online. That way it kind of keeps the time frame in there. As I mentioned before, if you're doing homebrew, you don't even have to worry about any of these time constraints. So what we're going to do for part 3, and we'll go ahead and note that on here. We'll say, just so if we decide to go through and continue fleshing this adventure out, we can do so later on. Traveling to the tower, we're going to say 45 to 50 minutes. Of course, if we're doing, if the call to action is going to be 15 minutes, we're going to do the second part at 45 minutes. If the call to action is going to be 10 minutes, we're going to do the second part at 50 minutes. We'll do arriving at the tower, 60 minutes. And then part 3, we'll say 1 hour. We'll say 45 minutes. That way we'll have about 15 minutes for the wrap up at the end, letting the characters know, let the players know what they've gained, if they want to gain a level, things like that. Typically, in Adventurers League at least, and what I like to do in my homebrew games is in Tier 1, because Tier 1 characters can be fairly squishy. And again, this is just me from playing and DMing for decades, is the grind of, don't get me wrong, I just recently started playing Dungeon Crawl Classics, and that adventure that type of game does have the old school feel of like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, where there was a character grind. You only got XP for killing creatures. Some DMs you got an XP per gold piece you found. That was something that was in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as well. And of course, limiting the amount of gold, limiting the creatures. The characters might spend 3 or 4 adventures or sessions before they get to second level. And that's a fairly long time, especially if you're playing with old school players, experienced players that enjoy that type of game. You can do so. But what I tend to do is have the adventures at the end of the adventure, at least in Tier 1, gain a level after every adventure, especially if it's a 4-hour session. That way, in about, you play your first adventure, they get to second level, second adventure, they get to third adventure, they get to fourth, and the fourth adventure, they finally get to Tier 2, which is 5th level. Now, if you want to extend that out and set it up to where, you play one adventure to get to level 2. At level 2, you got to play 2 adventures to get to level 3. At level 3, you got to play 3 adventures to get to level 4. You can design it along that way as well for using what are called your milestones that they have presented in the DMG and Player's Guide. Alternatively, you could go just straight experience points, as it's written in the Dungeon Master's Guide about how the characters level after each adventure. So what we're going to do is give us 15 minutes of time at the end of the adventure to let the party know, here's how much gold you received, here's how much XP, or if you level, here is any magic items you might have found, any consumables you might have found, and any information that you might want to give them if you continue the adventure on at another time. So we've got a few minutes left here, so let's go ahead and move on to adventure hooks. Let's see. Let's just get some names for some adventure hooks. So let's go ahead. Let's put a little header 3 on here just to separate a little bit from all of this below and above. So we've got our adventure background, our adventure overview, and our adventure hooks. We're going to say Friends of West Hall. Is it West Hall? Westfall. Westfall. Friends in Westfall. Let's say Friends of Westfall. We're looking at something along the lines of the characters are have friends or family in Westfall that have contacted them to come into the area to help out the constables looking for adventurers. So they either get something in the post or something to bring them to the village. Perhaps the apprentice of magic. Someone, perhaps maybe there's a wizard or a bard or sorcerer in the group, or that might work for or be apprenticed to someone that was once an apprentice to lore, so that they're somehow receive some sort of vision, some sort of magical contact or something. Perhaps maybe all of the wards and traps in the tower might be triggered to the apprentice still, and the apprentice is aware of something going on in the tower. So the apprentice sends the adventurer off in that direction. We can say then we can have something as simple as divine visions. This could be encompassing for all characters as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily for a cleric or a paladin or a divine sorcerer, divine soul sorcerer, or perhaps maybe a celestial warlock. It could be any characters. They just receive some sort of vision in their heads that pulls them to Westfall to enable them to start the adventure. So we've got the basics of a really fun adventure. Like I said, I only started off today with the idea of a wizard named Lore and a village of Westfall. So we've got a pretty solid start to creating a really fun adventure, especially for first level characters, and maybe even for new players to D&D, because it gives us the whole idea of getting an adventure, what the village is about, the constable of the village. It gives us the wizard's tower, traveling through the forest and such like that. So we have a really, really fun idea for it, hopefully. And we will go ahead next week and go ahead and start. And of course, if we have any questions, if we have viewers that have questions for the DM, I am going to try to get my chat fixed. As I mentioned, I am having trouble seeing the chat from Streamlabs and from Twitch. So I'm going to work on that. Hopefully between now and on Thursday for the Dungeon Delving stream. But we're going to go ahead and call this a wrap for today. We will save our changes here for this adventure. Let's name this adventure the Tower of Lore. Oops, lower. All right. And we will pick this up next week, next Tuesday for Dungeons and Deliberations. Of course, if we have, like I said, I mentioned I'll do my best to fix my Twitch chat issues between now and Thursday for Dungeon Delving. So speaking of which, we do have 3 more streams this week. Tomorrow night, at 7 p.m. Eastern, we do have our Tavern Talks with the Shifty Boar. We are bringing back Belinda Baldwin. We did have her on a couple of weeks ago. I did have some minor issues with the audio, so with all the echo and such. So we're bringing Belinda back tomorrow evening. We're going to be talking about all of the stuff that we talked about the previous week and 2 weeks ago, and discuss all that tomorrow evening. Of course, Thursdays and Fridays from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern, we do have Dungeon Delving, in which we play the video game Lord of the Rings Online. We play on the Landreval server in case anyone wants to join on that server. They're currently going through their 16th anniversary event, so we're going to be doing some of that as well. And then, of course, we will be back on Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern for our live play game of the level 5 adventure from Keys from the Golden Vault, with a couple of guest members from our community playing parts 1 and 2, which is this Sunday, May 7th, and then the following Sunday, May 14th. Again, if you want to check out our schedule, it is below. You can click on the About Us section below as well. Click on our socials. Go follow us on Instagram, all of the different platforms. Perhaps give us a subscription on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel, get notifications. We do upload all of our Twitch streams to YouTube after they are out of video on demand here on Twitch. You can also join our community Discord server, the Master of Dungeons Community Discord, if you click on the Discord panel below. And I think that is all we've got for today. We will see everyone, hopefully see some people back tomorrow evening for our Tavern Talks with the Shifty Boar. But you have a great rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. So take care, everyone. Bye, and happy adventuring.